The sound was coming from upstairs. It wasn't the gentle melody of a classical violin that Richard Harrington tolerated at gala dinners, nor the calculated silence he so prized in his Lake Forest mansion in Chicago. It was something raw, electric, and filled with an emotion he despised: the wail of a guitar. Each distorted note seemed like a crack forming in the flawless marble walls of his perfectly constructed life. He closed the heavy accounting ledger on his massive mahogany desk, the sharp thud echoing in the silent office. The pendulum clock in the hallway beat a funereal rhythm, each second a step closer to the storm he felt brewing under his own roof. With his jaw locked, Richard ascended the grand staircase, his Italian leather shoes making not a single sound on the Persian rug. He was a 52-year-old man forged in steel and discipline, whose stock market fortune was as legendary as his emotional coldness. His tailored gray suit was without a single wrinkle, a reflection of how he believed life should be: orderly, predictable, and under his absolute control. The music, however, was chaos, and it was coming from the room of his only son, Ethan. He turned the polished brass knob without knocking. The scene he found was an affront to everything he stood for. Ethan, 19 years old, had his back to the door, hunched over a vibrant blue Fender Stratocaster that looked like a piece of rebellious sky inside the room. His eyes were closed, his long dark hair falling over his face as his fingers danced across the strings with a feverish passion. Posters of bands Richard would never bother to recognize covered the walls, and scribbled sheet music was scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. The room smelled of dust, electricity, and the unmistakable energy of youth, an odor that, to Richard, was the smell of failure. "Turn that off." Richard's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as a blade. Ethan startled, and the final chord of the music died with a dissonant hum from the amplifier. He turned around, his face flushed with adrenaline and surprise. "Dad? I was almost getting the solo." "You were making noise," Richard corrected, his eyes scanning the chaos of the room with ill-disguised disgust. "A noise unbecoming of a future CEO. I thought we had agreed your focus would be on your final exams at Yale." Ethan set the guitar down with almost reverent care. "This is my focus now. This is more than a hobby." He gestured to the disarray around him. "This is what I want to do with my life." Richard felt a wave of icy fury rise in his spine. Years of investment, the best schools, etiquette classes, carefully cultivated contacts, all to be traded for a childish dream of noise and dirty stages. "Your life," he said, walking to the center of the room, "has been planned. Harrington Corp needs an heir, not a bar musician." It was then that Ethan said the words that set the world on fire. "I'm not going back to Yale, Dad. I called the dean this morning. I've unenrolled." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The pendulum clock downstairs seemed to have stopped. To Richard, this wasn't a decision. It was a declaration of war. The ultimate betrayal. His entire legacy, his name, his blood, being thrown away for a whim. He looked at his son's face, a softer version of his own, and saw nothing but a stranger, a failure. His voice, when it finally came, was dangerously low, devoid of any emotion. "If that is your choice, then mine are also made." He moved closer until they were inches apart, the scent of his expensive cologne mixing with Ethan's sweat. He looked deep into the boy's eyes, eyes that had once looked at him with adoration, and delivered the sentence, "You are no longer my son." Each word was a blow. Richard saw the color drain from Ethan's face, the boy's jaw tremble. He didn't stop. He wanted it to hurt. He wanted the lesson to be permanent. "And never again," he hissed, his voice barely more than a venomous whisper. "Dare to call me Dad." The clatter of the guitar pick falling from Ethan's trembling hand and hitting the wooden floor was the only sound in the room. Richard turned, walked out, and closed the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. That click was the sound of the end of a world, and the beginning of a silence that would last for 20 years. A silence that would cost him everything he didn't yet know he had. 20 years. 20 years is enough time for an empire to double in size. From his suite on the 87th floor of Harrington Tower in the heart of Chicago, Richard Harrington could see his domain stretching as far as the eye could see. Lake Michigan was a plate of dark blue steel, and the city, a glittering circuit board of power and money. Harrington Corp was no longer just a company, it was a dynasty. He had won. In every negotiation, in every hostile takeover, in every ruthless market move, he was the king. But kings in glass towers often reign alone. At 72, the silence he had once so prized had become a cellmate. His days were a routine of military precision. Meetings, reports, business lunches where smiles were as calculated as the numbers on the spreadsheets. The nights were even emptier. The mansion in Lake Forest, once the stage for a family life, was now an echoing mausoleum. The staff moved like ghosts, speaking in whispers, careful not to disturb the master's silence. There was no laughter, no arguments, no music. Ethan's room had been converted into a state-of-the-art gym with equipment that was rarely used. A brutal attempt to erase the memory of the boy with the guitar. But his absence was more palpable than any presence. Sometimes, passing a young man on the street with a guitar on his back, Richard would feel a pang in his chest, a sensation he quickly buried under layers of contempt and rationalization. Weakness, he would mutter to himself. I saved him from weakness. The first crack in Richard's fortress came not from a market crash, but from a betrayal by his own body. It began with a persistent fatigue that not even the strongest coffee could ward off. Then, a nagging pain in his chest that he ignored for months, attributing it to stress. Finally, at the behest of his board, he scheduled an appointment with the most renowned cardiologist in the city. In the sterile office, overlooking the same lake he saw from his tower, Richard heard the words that no amount of money could silence. There is a significant anomaly in your tests, Mr. Harrington, said Dr. Miles, a soft-spoken man whose calmness only accentuated the gravity of the situation. Your coronary arteries are severely compromised. We need more tests, an angiogram, but the situation is precarious. Richard listened impassively. He was used to problems. Problems had solutions. What's the plan? He asked, his voice as firm as if he were closing a deal. Who is the best surgeon in the country? Schedule him. Cost is irrelevant. The doctor sighed. Money can buy the best treatment, Richard, but it can't buy new time. We need to act quickly, but you need to understand the seriousness of this. Your lifestyle, the stress. You're on a tightrope. That night, sitting behind the wheel of his Bentley in the hospital's underground parking garage, Richard didn't start the engine. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow on the polished hood. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless. Death, the only negotiator he couldn't intimidate, was sitting in the passenger seat. And he was alone, completely, terrifyingly alone. There was no one to call, no one to share the weight of that diagnosis, no son to inherit his empire, or to simply hold his hand. In that moment of absolute silence, the image of a 19-year-old Ethan's shocked face invaded his mind with the force of a train. The word "Dad" echoed in his memory, a word he hadn't heard in 20 years. It is in this moment that the first real fissure appears in his armor. If this story has touched you so far, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your interaction helps us bring you more narratives like this. Richard's journey is far from over, and the weight of his mortality leads him to enact his pride never allowed. The next morning, back in his office, he didn't call his lawyers. He called the best private investigator in Chicago. The order was simple and direct, devoid of emotion. I want you to find a person. His name is Ethan Harrington. The last time I saw him, he was 19. Find him. Be discreet. I want a full report on my desk as soon as possible. A week later, a thick manila envelope landed on the mahogany desk. Inside, a detailed report and a series of photographs. Richard felt his heart, the same treacherous heart that had put him in this situation, hammer against his ribs. He flipped through the papers, reading about Ethan's life, the difficult years, the small bands, the odd jobs to pay rent, and then success. Not Wall Street success, but a different kind. Ethan had become a respected composer and music producer in Austin, Texas. He owned a small but influential recording studio. Then, Richard saw the photo. It was Ethan, now 39, his hair still a bit long, but with lines of maturity on his face. Beside him, a smiling woman, and holding Ethan's hand was a little girl of perhaps 6 or 7, with the same dark, curious eyes he remembered seeing in the crib. His granddaughter. The report identified her, Lily Harrington. The air fled Richard's lungs. A granddaughter, a piece of his blood in the world he never knew existed. He looked at the child's smiling face in the photo, and the crushing weight of 20 years of silence collapsed upon him. It was no longer about pride or legacy. It was about time, the time he had lost, and the little time that perhaps he still had left. The development will take us to Austin, Texas, for the inevitable and tense reunion. The wall of coldness that Ethan has built will be tested. The decision to go to Austin was not impulsive. Impulses were for artists and fools, and Richard Harrington considered himself neither. It was a cold calculation, a strategy. He spent 2 days locked in his office, not planning a corporate merger, but an invasion of his own history. He learned every detail of Ethan's life that the investigators' report offered. His wife's name was Sarah, an art teacher. His daughter's name was Lily. He knew the address of Ethan's recording studio, a place called Echo Creek Studios, and their home, a charming bungalow in a leafy neighborhood, worlds away from the sterile opulence of his Chicago mansion. He flew to Austin on his private jet, but in a rare moment of self-awareness, he decided not to drive up to Ethan's house in a chauffeured luxury sedan. He rented a discreet car at the airport, feeling like a stranger in his own skin, a general without an army in enemy territory. He drove to the studio address first. It was a renovated red brick building with a colorful mural of musical notes painted on the side. Through the window, he could see young musicians laughing, instruments in hand. There was an energy there, a vibe of creativity and collaboration that he never understood. It was the world Ethan had chosen, the world for which he had disowned him. For a moment, Richard's pride whispered, "He made it, without me." The thought was as surprising as it was uncomfortable. He waited in the car for hours, watching the Texas sun dip below the horizon, until he saw Ethan leave the studio. Seeing him in motion, in the flesh, was different from a photograph. He walked with a quiet confidence, the relaxed posture of a man at peace with his place in the world. He no longer looked like the defiant 19-year-old boy, but he also looked nothing like Richard. Richard's heart beat erratically, a combination of the doctor's diagnosis and a nervousness he hadn't felt in 50 years. The next day, he executed his plan. He didn't go to the house or the studio. Instead, he waited near Lily's elementary school, an act that bordered on spying, but which in his mind was the only logical path. He needed to see her. When the bell rang and the children came running out, he saw her immediately, Lily Harrington. She had Ethan's dark hair and her mother's smile, but her eyes were her grandfather's. The same intensity, the same spark. She ran and hugged Ethan, who was waiting for her at the gate. The sight of that hug, so natural and full of love, was like a physical knife in Richard's chest. It was the universe showing him exactly what he had thrown away. It was Ethan who saw him. His gaze swept the street and stopped on the rental car. There was a second of confusion, then a flash of recognition that quickly solidified into a mask of disbelief and coldness. Ethan's smile vanished. He whispered something to Lily, who looked at Richard with childish curiosity, and then guided her to their car. With Lily safely inside, Ethan walked slowly toward Richard's vehicle, his steps measured and heavy. Richard felt panic rise. He got out of the car, his body rigid, his expensive suit feeling like a suit of armor amidst the casual suburban setting. The two men faced each other from across the street, the air crackling with 20 years of unsaid words. "What are you doing here?" Ethan's voice was low, controlled, but with an edge of steel that Richard recognized. It was his own determination, turned against him. "Ethan," Richard began, his voice hoarser than he intended. I needed I needed to see you. You've seen me. Now you can leave," Ethan said without moving. He didn't yell. His calm was 1,000 times more devastating. It was the calm of a door that has been closed, locked, and the keys thrown away. "There are things you don't know," Richard said, trying to find a crack in the wall. "Things that have happened. He stopped. The word sick felt like a pathetic excuse. The word sorry felt impossible to pronounce. Ethan gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Things I don't know? Let me guess. You realized you can't take your fortune with you when you die, and you need a last-minute heir?" The accuracy of the accusation hit Richard like a punch. "You lost the right to show up in my life the day you told me I was no longer your son. You lost the right to know my wife. And you," his voice faltered for a fraction of a second, "certainly lost the right to spy on my daughter at her school." Every word was a blade, twisting the wound that had never healed. Richard, the master of intimidation, the man who made others tremble, was completely disarmed. He had no power here. His money, his status, his influence, it was all useless in the face of the pain he himself had created. He looked at the hardened face of his son, a stranger forged by his own pride, and understood that the way back would not be a negotiation. It would be a surrender, and he didn't even know where to begin. "Please," was the only word he could manage, a fragile whisper almost carried away by the wind. Ethan just shook his head slowly, disappointment etched in every line of his face. "It's too late, Richard." He turned and walked back to his car, leaving Richard alone on the sidewalk, an exiled king in a kingdom that was never his. Richard Harrington did not retreat. The humiliation on the sidewalk in front of the school was a setback, not a defeat. He withdrew to the presidential suite of a 5-star hotel in downtown Austin, a familiar environment of impersonal luxury that served as his headquarters. Surrounded by cold marble and panoramic views of a city that was not his, he did what he always did when confronted with a problem. He tried to buy the solution. He couldn't understand that the currency in Ethan's kingdom was not the dollar, but emotion, and in that regard, he was bankrupt. 2 days later, a special delivery van pulled up in front of the Harringtons' bungalow. What was delivered was not a bouquet of flowers or a letter of apology, but a child's baby grand piano, white, from an absurdly expensive German brand, with the name Lily engraved in mother of pearl on the lid. It was a gift as grandiose as it was inappropriate, a monument to Richard's complete misunderstanding of the situation. It was a gesture of power, not contrition. The reaction was not long in coming. Richard's phone rang that afternoon. The name Ethan Harrington lit up the screen. For a moment, Richard felt a spark of hope. He answered, "Ethan?" The voice on the other end of the line was not one of reconciliation. It was a steel wire pulled to its breaking point. "Listen here, you?" Ethan stopped, taking a deep breath. "What do you think you're doing? You think you can just send a white elephant to my house and everything will be forgotten? My daughter is not an item to be bought. My family is not a subsidiary of your company that you can acquire at your convenience." "It was a gift for my granddaughter," Richard said, his voice defensive. "I have the right." "You have no right to anything." Ethan's voice finally broke with rage. "You lost all your rights 20 years ago in that room. You taught me how to live without you. Well, I learned. I built a life, a happy life, without a single cent of your money. A life where my daughter knows what it's like to have a father who supports her, who doesn't threaten her with exile for being who she is. Stay away from us, Richard. I'm having your piano sent back. If you try anything else, I'm calling the police." The call ended with an abrupt click. The silence in the hotel suite was absolute. Ethan's words, "Stay away from us, Richard," echoed in his mind. He had called him Richard, not Dad. The finality in those words hit him harder than the doctor's diagnosis. For the first time, he considered the real possibility that it was too late. Desperation. A strange and suffocating emotion began to take hold. He loosened his tie, feeling a familiar pressure in his chest. "I'm running out of time," he whispered to the empty room. Meanwhile, at the Harrington home, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan paced the living room, anger radiating from him in waves. Sarah, his wife, watched him with calm, understanding eyes. She waited for the initial storm to pass before she spoke. "I understand why you're angry, E. I would be too," she said softly. It was an arrogant and insensitive gesture. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But it was also a desperate gesture. "It's a gesture of control, Sarah. It's all he knows," Ethan retorted. "I know. But tell me something," she continued, approaching him. "What did he say to you on the street the other day? And why now? Why after 20 years of absolute silence does he suddenly appear?" "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "Or maybe not. Ethan, this man caused you immense pain, and you have every right to never want to see him again." She came closer, taking his hands, which were clenched into fists. "But he's not going to live forever. The hatred you carry is a burden, a poison that only you drink. If he's here, after all this time, maybe this is your only chance to get the answers you deserve. For your own sake, and for Lily's sake, who will one day want to know the whole story?" Ethan let out a breath, his body finally losing some of its rigidity. "And what am I supposed to do, Sarah? Invite him to dinner? Introduce him to the granddaughter he never knew existed until last week?" The sarcasm in his voice was a thin layer of ice over an ocean of pain. "I don't know what you should do," she admitted, "but I know that ignoring this won't make it go away. Just think about it." Sarah's words hung in the air, leaving Ethan in a tumultuous silence, torn between the protective wall he had built for 20 years and the small seed of doubt his wife had just planted. Meanwhile, miles away in the presidential suite, Richard Harrington was losing his own battle. Ethan's words on the phone, "Stay away from us, Richard," were the trigger. The emotional stress of the final rejection was too much for his already fragile body. The pressure in his chest, which had started as a discomfort, became a crushing pain, as if an iron hand were squeezing his heart. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. He staggered to the minibar, knocking over a bottle of water with trembling hands as he fumbled for his medication. His vision began to darken at the edges. The luxury of the suite, the artwork, the designer furniture, distorted into menacing shapes. He tried to reach the phone on the desk, thinking to call the front desk, an ambulance, anyone. Every step was agony. He grabbed the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, but his strength failed him. With a low groan, he slid to the floor, the soft, expensive carpet being the last thing he felt before the darkness took him completely. An hour later, the phone at Ethan's house rang again. Seeing the same number from the Austin hotel, he felt a wave of irritation. "He doesn't give up," he muttered, tempted to ignore it. But Sarah's advice echoed in his mind. With a sigh, he answered, ready for another argument. "What is it now, Richard?" But the voice on the other end wasn't his father's. It was calm, professional, and carried a restrained urgency. "Am I speaking with Mr. Ethan Harrington?" "Yes," Ethan replied, confusion replacing his anger. "Who is this?" "Sir, my name is David Chen. I'm the security manager at the St. Regis Hotel. There has been an incident. We found your father, Mr. Richard Harrington, unconscious in his suite. The paramedics are with him now. You were the last number dialed from his phone. They are transporting him to St. David's Medical Center. He is in critical condition." Ethan's world stopped spinning. Every word from the security manager seemed to come from far away, through a thick fog. Unconscious, paramedics, critical condition. The wall he had spent 20 years building crumbled in less than 20 seconds. The hatred, the anger, the resentment, it all evaporated, replaced by a primal, terrifying feeling he hadn't felt since he was a boy. Fear of losing his father. Sarah, seeing the color drain from Ethan's face and the way he clutched the phone, already knew. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and he finally looked at her, his eyes wide with the raw reality of what was happening. The choice was no longer his. Life, or perhaps death, had made it for him. All the pain, silence, and pride accumulated over 20 years converge in a sterile hospital room, where a powerful man is reduced to his most vulnerable form. This conclusion was written to be impactful, emotional, and to provide a complete yet realistic closure to Richard and Ethan's journey. The 10-minute drive to St. David's Medical Center felt like a lifetime. The lights of Austin blurred past the car window, but Ethan didn't see them. His mind was a whirlwind of images. His father's furious face 20 years ago, his daughter's smile at the school gate, and now, the terrifying image of Richard, the indestructible, fallen, and unconscious. The anger that had been his companion for 2 decades had dissipated, leaving behind a cold void of fear. Sarah drove in silence, her hand on his knee, the only anchor keeping him from falling apart. At the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and the cold efficiency of the emergency staff were an assault on the senses. A tired-faced doctor met them in the waiting room. "Myocardial infarction, a massive one," he said without mincing words. "We've managed to stabilize him for now, but he's not out of the woods. The next 12 hours are critical." Ethan nodded, the words barely registering. He asked to see his father, alone. The room in the ICU was a cocoon of technology and soft, rhythmic beeps. And there, in the center of it all, was Richard Harrington. But this was not the Titan he knew. The man in the bed was pale, shrunken beneath a white sheet, with tubes and wires connecting him to machines that kept him alive. For the first time, Ethan didn't see the monster of his past, but just an old, frail, and frightened man. The sight broke the final barrier around his heart. Richard's eyes fluttered open, hazy with medication and exhaustion. They focused on Ethan, and a spasm of something that looked like pain, not physical, but something much deeper, crossed his face. "Ethan." The voice was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible over the hum of the monitors. Ethan approached the bed, his hands in his pockets, not knowing what to do or say. "I'm here." Silent tears began to stream down Richard's temples, tracing paths in the wrinkles of his face. "I was wrong," he said, each word a monumental effort. "That day, about everything, my pride. It cost me the only thing that mattered. It cost me you." He paused, struggling for breath. "There isn't a day in these 20 years that I haven't heard that silence, the silence that I created." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to scream, to list all the lonely nights, all the birthdays without a phone call, all the pain he had carried. But looking at the broken man before him, the accusations died on his lips. "Why now?" Ethan whispered, the question that haunted him. "The doctor told me my time was running out," Richard confessed, "and I realized I would die as I lived, alone. A rich man in a mausoleum. Then I saw the photo of her, your daughter, my granddaughter. More tears came. She has my eyes, and I realized that my legacy isn't a tower with my name on it. It's her, and I was losing her without ever having known her. The desperate plea of a grandfather, not a tyrant, was what finally reached Ethan. He saw his own daughter's future and the importance of roots, of history. The anger didn't disappear completely. The scars were too deep, but it was overcome by a wave of compassion. He reached out and, hesitating for a moment, rested his hand on his father's forearm. The skin was thin and cold. "Rest now," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just rest." 2 days later, Richard was moved to a private room. His condition was still delicate, but he was stable. That afternoon, Ethan entered the room, but he wasn't alone. Holding his hand was Lily, who looked around with the curiosity of a 7-year-old. Richard struggled to sit up, his eyes fixed on the little girl. Ethan guided her closer to the bed. "Dad, this is Lily. Lily, this is your grandfather, Richard." Lily gave a small, shy wave. Richard held out a trembling hand, and the girl, without fear, placed her small hand in his. In that moment, 20 years of silence were broken, not by words, but by a simple touch. Tears now flowed freely down Richard's face. "Grandpa," Lily said, her voice clear and innocent. "Why are you crying?" Richard looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with an apology, gratitude, and a love he finally allowed himself to feel. Ethan squeezed his father's shoulder and answered for the first time on behalf of them both. closing the cycle of pain with a promise of healing. They're tears of happiness, sweetie, of happiness. The story of Richard and Ethan shows us how pride can build walls and how forgiveness, even if late, can open a door to healing. If this message touched your heart, help us bring it to more people. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. And we want to know your opinion. Comment below what part moved you the most and what city you're watching from. A big hug, and see you in the next video.